falar, eu já vou. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Vander Alves. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science of the University of Brasilia. And it's my pleasure to have here Professor Yale Patt. I'm going to read a short bio of Professor Patt, and we're going to do an interview about the role and what should a graduate student behave and achieve during his stay or her stay at the university. Professor Yale Patt is Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering and the Ernst Cockrell Jr. Centennial Chair in Engineering at the University of Texas, Austin. He supervises the research of 12 PhD students in microarchitecture, loves teaching freshmen, seniors, and graduate students, and consults extensively in the microprocessor industry. He has the appropriate degrees from reputable universities and more than enough awards for his research and teaching. Okay, so Professor Patt, it's our pleasure, and we have here some questions about what should a graduate student do during his or her stay at the university. We're going to start with this question. Why should anyone consider graduate school?
So first of all, you have to understand that my answers are going to reflect, first of all, my opinions, and not everyone will share my opinions. So if you want a comprehensive answer, you really need to talk to more than one person. Mm-hmm. And second of all, I come from the U.S., so my answers are somewhat a function of the environment in the United States. Why should a student opt for going to graduate school rather than taking a job at the termination of the baccalaureate? In the U.S. at least, there is no way that in 4 years of college, that is the baccalaureate, can we provide both an education, meaning including literature and history and government and all the things that we expect of an educated person, and at the same time give the appropriate training in computer engineering or computer science or any computing discipline. So at the end of the baccalaureate, the student is not really ready to consider himself or herself a professional. If the bachelor's degree is being used as a stepping stone to business school or medical school or law school, then fine, terminate with the bachelor's degree. But if the person wants to really be a professional in the computing area, then the student should stick around and get a master's degree. PhD is a different matter. One should not think about the PhD unless one has what we call the fire in the belly to conquer a new ground, to come up with something new, to solve some problem that so far has not been solved, to take a voyage on uncharted seas. And that's not really something that everyone is well suited for. So the master's degree, everyone who wants to be a professional in the field. The PhD, only if you have the temperament and the suitability for that degree.
Okay. So what to expect after graduation?
So that depends on you and the job you take and too many other things that it's really hard to determine. Which really begs another question, which is what should you look for in a job? Not everybody wants challenging work. Some people are perfectly happy doing mundane tasks for the rest of their life and having a job which they can leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and their real enjoyment comes from what happens after 5 o'clock. And other people consider their job a critical part of their life, and they thrive on the challenges of the job. Okay. Computing, we're only in the infancy of computing, so I don't care whether you're a software engineer or a computer architect designing new computers, or whether you're designing algorithms to maybe someday cure cancer or whatever. We're just at the infancy of computing. With we've only been a discipline for the last 50 years, so the future is just wide open. There is challenges all over the place if you have the intellectual capacity and the willingness and to use that intellectual capacity.
Okay. And now suppose that there is a new graduate student, so he or she has just arrived, and what should he or she expect during his or her graduate life?
So that depends on whether the student is a master's degree student or a doctoral student. Again, I don't know the situation here at the University of Brasilia. In the U.S., graduate education puts more of the responsibility on the student than undergraduate education. Many, if not most, graduate courses don't use textbooks. They use the notes of the professor or conference and journal papers that have been published recently. The professor may mention casually in class a particular paper, and it's up to the student to then look up that paper. It's not, you are not spoon-fed anywhere near the level that you are in undergraduate school. And I think that's just a matter of maturation. You know, when you're 2 years old, your mother has to feed you. You know, by the time you start school, you're expected to drink milk from a glass by yourself. By the time you get to college, you take on more of the responsibility yourself. In graduate school, it's much more than undergraduate school. Generally, you take fewer courses. Generally, you get involved with the research program of a professor. You may be asked to be a teaching assistant in a course. There is a lot more openness to the avenues that you travel and a lot less being structured by the system as to what you can do. The PhD is complete freedom. You get to live your PhD research constantly. It's a part of what you're doing all day, every day.
Okay. How do you choose a graduate student?
So I'm not big on looking at application folders and trying to hold the application to my forehead and somehow figure out by the feel of the paper just what the graduate student is about. So I wait until I've had substantive interaction with the student. Now, at many universities, that's not possible. Many universities, when you enter, you have an advisor from day one. At my university, fortunately, I can wait. I expect the student to take 2 courses with me, the senior level first-year graduate course, and then my special course, my advanced microarchitecture course. And I watch what he does. I see, is the student bright? Is he creative? I also see, is he willing to work hard? If he's not willing to work hard, I have no use for him. I also want to be sure he's a good person. Is he going to try to cut in line, take advantage of the other students, or is he going to be willing to do more than his share of the menial tasks that we all have to do in order to coexist in a harmonious environment? So I guess the things I look for, and I look for them both in the 2 courses he takes or she takes with me. I have had PhDs that are women that have now gone on to excellent careers. I look for these 3 things. Does their brain work? Do they have the drive to use it effectively? And are they good human beings that are willing to not always look for what's in it for me, but be a helpful member of my research team?
Okay. And now, conversely, what should a grad student look for in an advisor?
So the graduate student should wake up in the morning and say, wow, I am a student of Professor X, whoever Professor X may be. If the student doesn't feel that way, then he or she is working for the wrong advisor. So I would say that the student should, first of all, be on the same wavelength with the professor. I don't care how good a professor is, there is some student who will claim that professor is the worst. And I don't care how bad a professor is, there'll be some student who will claim that professor is the best. All of that's irrelevant. What's relevant is that the student looking for an advisor, that the student learns best the way that advisor teaches. It's what we call an impedance match. That is, the student and the professor on the same wavelength. That's absolutely the single most important ingredient. And the other part of it is this wow factor that I mentioned, that you ought to feel good about your professor. That whatever the character and the personality and the attributes of your professor, you ought to feel good about it. Because if you resent your professor, or if you wish you were working for somebody else, you won't do your best work. So I think I'm back to my first comment. When you wake up in the morning, you ought to say, wow, and jump out of bed and say, I am a graduate student of this particular professor.
Okay. And what do you think is the role of the advisor?
The role of the advisor has many, many roles. One has to nurture without constraining. So the advisor has to recognize that the student will not be productive every day. And so a good advisor, I think, allows the student to flounder from time to time, feeling the student's way. Not every day will the student do excellent research. In fact, I tell my students that when the end of a day and the student has come up with nothing, and that's most days actually, there are far more days when research produces nothing than research produces something. I say, you know, what I think I ought to do is give you a shovel and have you go in the back of the building and dig a hole in the ground. And that way you'll be able to look at the hole and say, look, I accomplished something, right? And then the next day, when the student accomplishes nothing, I'll say, now fill in the hole. What's my point? That digging a hole is easy. Accomplishing something in research is not easy, and it takes day after week after month, sometimes, to get results. Some advisors will give the student a problem and say, okay, here is the problem, solve it. I don't do that. I've already written my thesis. I don't have to write another one. My job, as I see it, is to guide the student to the point where the student can find his or her own problem, because if the student finds a problem, the student is going to be much more excited and do a much better job. That means false starts. The advisor has to be patient. Takes longer. Both the advisor and the student have to be patient. But the end result is when the student graduates, the student can then go on to a job without taking the advisor with him or her, because the student can stand on his or her own feet. So the role of the advisor is to prepare the student to stand on his or her own feet. And that takes sometimes a fair amount of effort. But at the end, it's absolutely the right answer.
Okay. Should a graduate student have a job during his or her studies?
A job? What do you mean by a job?
Well, for example, here in Brasilia, the cost of living is very high, so many students feel they have the need to work. And because of that, it's very rare to have a full-time graduate student. Do you think this is beneficial or not to his or her graduate student life?
Most of the time it's not beneficial, because graduate education requires the student to immerse himself or herself into the work of the graduate education. So the best, so let me give you an example. A student is working on a problem. Well, let's take an example of me. One of the best results I ever came up with when I was a graduate student. And I was having trouble with a problem, and I sat down at, I think it was maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I started working. And I was excited, and I was getting, finally I was getting some results. And I was working, and I was working, and I didn't notice the time. And midnight came, and midnight went. And noon came, and noon went. And about 1 o'clock in the afternoon of the following day, I finally put my pen down, and I was exhausted. Now, if I had a part-time job, I would have had to stop what I was doing and go to work. So, no. The work one does in graduate school can be consuming, and it's not a matter of 10 minutes here and 20 minutes there. It's a matter of tackling a problem, and sometimes it takes many, many hours to solve the problem. In the graduate courses, also in the research. So a job can get in the way unless the people at the company, at the job, recognize this. Now, having said that, it's also the case that if the student has a job that is related to the research the student is doing, then the job can be a godsend, because the job can motivate the student to do better research. That is, for example, the student can be working for a database company, and there are problems with databases, and the student starts thinking about the problems, and then at the university starts working with his or her professor on database research, and the student's motivated to come up with a better solution. It would be good if the students did not have to work, but, you know, we can fantasize beautiful environments all we want. If the reality is that the student has to work, then the student has to work. I would hope that the student would find a job that's relevant, and secondly, work only the number of hours that are absolutely necessary in order to survive. So if the student wants to have a job that allows the student to drive a BMW to campus and live in a penthouse apartment, then I would say maybe the student shouldn't be in graduate school. So how many hours a week? I don't know. But I would hope as few as possible, as necessary, as few as necessary, if the student is going to take graduate education seriously.
Okay. Just in the same direction of this question, then how many hours on average do you think a graduate student should work a week?
How many hours should a graduate student work on the job, or work as a graduate student?
As a graduate student.
As a graduate student. So there are 24 hours in a day. There are 7 days in a week. Do the simple multiplication. I have 168 hours in a week. So certainly my answer has to be fewer than 168. It's really hard to say. Graduate education is not a 40-hour-a-week job. Now, I don't know what the labor laws are in Brazil. In the U.S., the standard work week for someone is 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Same
5
here.
times 8 is 4. That's the same thing here. Yeah, graduate school, in fact, the faculty doesn't work 40-hour weeks either. If you are serious about your work, 40 hours a week is not going to be enough. How many hours does a graduate student work? I don't know, 60 maybe? 70 maybe? Serious graduate work is not something that takes 40 hours a week. It takes commitment, and one should understand that up front. But the rewards are worth it. And in fact, your advisor is working far more than 40 hours a week as well.
Why are the basic courses important? For example, if I'm conducting research or want to conduct research on software engineering, why are these basic courses like algorithms, hardware theory important for me?
Because these basic courses provide a foundation. And you never know when the concepts in the basic courses are going to influence the research that you're able to do. I'm a microarchitect. My specialty is to come up with ideas that companies like Intel and AMD and IBM, et cetera, have taken my ideas, and they're now in the laptop of in the microprocessor that is controlling your laptop. I've been very fortunate. Several of my ideas are in the microprocessor that's in your laptop. My students also contribute ideas that are in the microprocessor of your laptop. How come? Because my students and I pay very close attention to more than just computer architecture or microarchitecture. We pay attention to VLSI circuits. Why? Because when you design a chip, the chip is made up of circuits, and even though we don't design the circuits, if we don't understand the constraints associated with the circuits, then we're limiting what we can come up with. Similarly, my students and I understand operating systems. My students take graduate courses in operating systems, graduate courses in compiler design. We don't write operating systems and we don't write compilers. But if we don't understand what the computer is being used for and what the capability of the operating system and the compiler is, then we're more limited in what we can invent, create, be able to come up with at the architecture level. And this is pervasive. I don't care what you are doing research in, whether it's application software, whether it's algorithm design, good example. So I'm writing an algorithm. The choice of algorithm is very much a function of what the underlying architecture provides. And if the algorithm person doesn't understand the architecture, that limits what the algorithm person can do. So in my view, I don't care what your specialty is in computing research, you need a strong grounding in all the basic courses. And by the way, I would include, in addition to the computing basic courses, I would also include math and statistics. Because those tools, if you will, we don't use them every day, but when we need them, we better be well grounded in them if we're going to do good research in computing.
So what's the importance of having publications in conference journals? Should they be the only guide for graduate research results?
So I'm not sure I understand what you mean by the only guide.
So a graduate student, PhD student, for example, is expected to publish a number of papers in conferences and journals. So should a tool, for example, also be accepted as a result, research result?
A tool. So that's a function of the discipline. So in my field, in computer architecture, the tools that we build are for our own use. They're ugly, they're not user-friendly. I would never encourage someone else to use those tools. We write the software, and we do a lot of programming in my research group, but the programs are to prove concepts in computer architecture, and the tools are devices to allow us to do that. They're not something that we would put up on the flagpole and say, look what we've done. Now, that's not true in other sub-disciplines. For example, algorithm design or simulation methodology. There are researchers that the hallmark of their research is to develop a tool that that others can use to generate powerful results, and to make that tool easy for the other person to use. So certainly in some disciplines, tool development is important. In my field, no. It's ideas that then demonstrate that we can do something now that we couldn't do before, and that naturally leads to publication in conferences and journals. In fact, I've been very fortunate. My research and the research of my students get published regularly in the top journals in our field. The International Symposium on Computer Architecture, the International Symposium on Microarchitecture, and our papers are accepted reflects that the community feels that what we've come up with represents a step forward in those fields. Has nothing to do with tools. But that's a function of the particular subdiscipline that you're in.
Okay. And finally, what's important when choosing a work thesis area?
What should the student select? So first of all, I hope the student has the ability, not ability, that's the wrong word, has the freedom to pick the thesis topic. There are some advisors that will pick the thesis topic for the student. I don't happen to be one of them. What's important for the student to pick a thesis area is to pick a topic that's going to be fun. The student is going to work 60 hours a week, perhaps. If it's not fun, then the student's not going to be successful. So it ought to be something, in fact, let me say, I got a better way to say it. There are two things that are important to happiness, and happiness is what we're all about. Happiness is working on something that you enjoy working on and being good at it. So you have to have both. This is an and gate that we're talking about. So picking a thesis topic, pick a topic in an area where you're good at it and an area where you enjoy working in that area. Okay.
So this concludes our interview, and I'd like to thank you very much for your time and hope that you can visit our university many more times. Thank you.
It has been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, have fun putting this into some form that makes us look good.
Okay, it was
didn't take that long, right? So it took a little.